An interesting backstory.
I think it's important that everybody knows about the Wizard of Oz.
A professional with decades of experience in her field.
I'm a psychotherapist who works pretty much exclusively with law enforcement officers, as well as other first responders.
Strong opinions and a definite point of view.
What people see on the streets, this job, is not normal.
Brutally honest and funny.
When I get a call in the middle of the night and they've been drinking beer, they're normally crying over a relationship. When they're drinking Jack, they get on the phone and they start off with, "Hey babe."
She identifies problems, probes, pokes, and makes you think.
So if something happens to your family, which is truly your biggest fear, and you haven't thought about every single potential of what could go wrong, then you feel like you failed.
She has her own special style.
You're either part of the problem or part of the solution. Pick a side.
Welcome to StephTherapy911 with Stephanie Samuels.
Hello and welcome to StephTherapy911 with Stephanie Samuels. It is my honor today to have another Stephanie on the show, also a PHer, so it's always nice when they spell it correctly. Dr. Stephanie Conn is a police psychologist from Portland, Oregon, who has spent really her life working with law enforcement. She is the daughter of a police officer. She is the spouse of a police officer, and she herself is a police officer, and has done many jobs within inside the police departments. And being able to take a wealth of knowledge into a career and understand on so many different levels has been a tremendous gift. So as I was talking to Stephanie before, she's everywhere. She is absolutely everywhere. You go on LinkedIn, Stephanie's commenting here. You go on Facebook, Stephanie's commenting there. And it's just, she's one of the few people that when she makes a comment, you stop. You stop, you read it, because there you go. Because you are just spot on. And she's written an incredible book that I think is just valuable for law enforcement as well as their families. And, one of the things is this last week that, made me reach out was when you were talking about kind of retirement. And yet we got a long career that these first responders, God willing, need to survive, not just physically, but emotionally. And how to do that. Stephanie's also involved in getting a list of truly nationally, culturally competent therapists throughout the United States. She has a gift certainly to CopLine to be able to try and get those, because so important to be able to have great resources when an officer needs them, or any first responder. So it's just, these are, while running a private practice, writing books. So just an incredible amount of stuff on your plate, and you do it all really well. But I wanted to have her on the show so that she can kind of discuss just the different arenas, because I really consider her an expert in so many. So it is an honor to have you on.
Thank you. Gosh, after that introduction, I have no place to go but down. That's so funny. Yeah, as you mentioned, I'm busy. I'm involved. I don't like the word busy because it sounds like I'm complaining, and I would never complain about just the blessing it is to be able to do this job. I'm lucky to be involved in a number of projects and to be able to help people at varying places in their career, whether it be as a psychologist, a therapist at the bottom of the waterfall. I'm always using the waterfall metaphor for well-being, because a lot of time those of us that do this line of work at the bottom of the waterfall, where people have gotten in the water, the first responder work, they've been shoved down, bruised and battered, bashed along the rocks along the way, and then they crash at the bottom. And so we're down there scooping them up and trying to help them, resuscitate them, get them back together. But I'm also very blessed to work upstream with, trying to do trainings, do wellness programs, do a lot of support for peer support teams. I work with several agencies locally, developing their peer supporters, trying to make them into resilience ninjas, because it's not enough for them just to be down there at the bottom of the waterfall with me trying to scoop them up, but rather they need to be upstream, being able to help them and help others. And then I'm also trying to get some more people, like good help at the bottom of the waterfall and even further up, like in terms of making sure we don't have clinicians asking officers why they have their gun out when they're in a shooting. Just little things like that.
Well,
which has actually happened. I actually got hired by an EAP because one of their clinicians, the EAP clinician, asked an officer that was involved in a shooting why he had his gun out. And he just was like, what the fuck? Like, I went and told his agency, and his agency was like, what the? And that insurance, so that EAP said, hey, can you do some training just to kind of explain, guys?
you said, why? I don't see anything wrong with what's going on.
I know, I was just, which, again, gives me plenty of work to do, breaks my heart though, from time to time, because then it, the reflection or the reputation of one in my mind is the reputation of all. And so that gives me a lot more work to do on my end to try to build trust with people, because
yes,
you get one or two chances, if you're lucky, for a first responder to trust you with their story, to trust you to helping them. And that really kind of sets us back.
Tremendously. And they're an interesting population, because I find many times they are an unforgiving population.
Mm-hmm.
But part of that is just their survival.
Yeah, everything's about preserving themselves. And if they take a risk and you fail them,
absolutely,
they might take a risk again, but it diminishes each time. You have to have somebody that's really persistent and believes in what we're able to offer. But I think that's kind of hard to come by, hopefully increasingly though.
Yeah. I had an officer who had been involved in a shooting, actually in New York City. And it was a whole lot of different issues. I'm pretty far away. Knew somebody in New York, referred him to them, and didn't hear back. 9/11 hits. I go into Manhattan, and I'm doing debriefings along with this other therapist. And I say, hey, did so-and-so ever get in touch with you? And she said, yes. And I said, oh, I'm so glad. She said, my practice was full. I'm like, where'd he go? She's like, I don't know. So after 9/11, he ended up calling me, and I'm like, I don't give a shit about insurance. I don't give a shit about anything.
Mm-hmm.
Just if you can get into my office, I'll meet you anywhere. And
Mm-hmm.
he's been with me since 2001. But I think to myself, so that's just it. So to me, was it an error in cultural competence? Clearly it was, because to me, no culturally competent therapist will ever not have the time. You will find the 25th hour in a 24-hour day to
Mm-hmm.
get somebody into your practice. So,
and that's what kind of what I was alluding to when we were talking before this started, is that, it's a variety of things that we're looking for in terms of vetting the clinician. Do you have the chops in terms of your clinical skills, like to work with trauma, shift work disorder, sleep stuff, relationship issues that are specific to first responders. But then there's also some other things that are, and I came up with the term FTEP, which over here on the West Coast stands for, the Field Training Evaluation Program. So it's like their field training acronym, but in the therapeutic standpoint, it's fit. Is it personality? Are you more of a, like personality wise, are you going to be able to hang with the person that you're with, right? Do you want someone that's more of a support and sit and listen to you, or someone that's going to be active and saying, okay, here's some strategies you might, try. What is their training? What is their experience with first responders? And then the one you mentioned where you kind of let someone fall off down the river by themselves is, what are their, kind of practice issues? Like, if you're full, do you connect them with someone else? Do you put them on a wait list and keep them aware of when your next availability will be?
right.
Are you modifying your hours? Do you share a waiting room with someone else who their they arrested the day before, right? So it's those little things that, it's those little practical details that matter a lot. Because, and I have, for the first time in 10 years as a clinician, have had to restrict how many people that I take, just because, well, I'm just going to say it, 2020 happened. But if someone gets hold of me because they've need someone, they know if I can't get them in, and I can't get them on the wait list to get them in soon, one, they're automatically going to have a list of clinicians in the area with full descriptions of who they are, contact information, what their background is, what insurance they take, blah, blah, blah. They're going to get that right out of the gate. But then I'm going to say, let me know if those don't come through for you, because I'll find you another one, or maybe by then I'll get you in. There is no, and I've been known to extend my hours or cancel lunches or see people on my days off to make that happen. You're not going to fall through the cracks.
Right.
But when people just say, oh, nope, I'm full, and that's just that to me, I have a much higher expectation for first responder clinicians than that.
Absolutely. I mean, my gift was that he made the second call, which was the miracle. The true miracle was that he made that second call. So, and never would I have given him the name of somebody that I did not think was doing it. So it's that's so key. And in the nation right now, there's so much hypervigilance about seeking help to begin with. And, I've been asked the question, is it better to have had bad help than no help? I'm a firm believer in no help is better than bad help, because no help, we can at least get them to somebody. Bad help, they'll say that they've already tried somebody and it's not for them. Kind of like that sweeping brush that nobody wants to, be brushed with, ends up happening.
Yeah. And I say that about clinicians, but I say that about peer teams. I say I'd rather have no peer team than a bad peer team. Nobody wants to look at a peer support team that's everybody on the team is a shit show and drinks as much and bitches as much about stuff that's happening in, the department and the city or what have you. And people are like, I wouldn't go to those people and talk to them because they're just as apt to unload on me as I am to unload on them. They're not dealing with stuff. Why would I expect them to help me with what I'm struggling with? Right. So it's the same thing in peer support teams. And it's the same thing in clinicians. And because I've actually had complaints where people tried, and again, this isn't just to knock all EAPs, but sadly, some of the criteria is not as it should be. But they said, well, this clinician started telling me about their kid that had been arrested or had gotten a traffic ticket or some of their other stuff. And we're like, well, wait, am I here to talk to you about your legal issues, or are we here to talk to me about my struggles that I'm having? And there was just this bizarre role reversal where the cop client's just like, oh my God, really? I can't even get away from it, even when I'm paying you.
Right. Yeah.
I can't even get away with it.
That's that whole piece of vetting. Peer support also needs to be vetted. Just because, you want to be a peer support counselor does not mean that you're wired for it. I know that I was part of a roundtable in DC where one of the things that they were talking about, exactly what you're talking about with clinicians, is having a standard that all, peer support, I was in an agency where literally on Friday, the head of the gang unit became the head of peer support on Monday.
Yeah, because that's interchangeable.
No, I was thinking the same thing. I was like, oh, thank God we got the best in here. So it's just, and then you have the peer support workers that also have not been trained, but because they've had, different issues and dealt with them, that makes them good at that. That was one of the biggest challenges, which is where CopLine is very difficult to do training with officers, is because they're trained in active listening skills. So advice giving is gone. Well, you take a bunch of cops, as I say, after 45 hours, if they make it through, and not everybody does, their wives love us.
Yeah, no doubt.
or their spouses, but they are just, it's such a struggle to really
Yeah.
understand the concepts of this. So
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because I had two thoughts. As one, as a very wise chaplain that I had some training with, I received training by him. He said, you don't want to feed, fight, or fix people's issues, right? You don't feed it where you start bitching about whatever they're bitching about. You don't fight it and say, oh, you shouldn't have to worry. You shouldn't worry about that. That's no big deal. And you don't fix it. Well, let me talk to the sergeant, or let me talk to so-and-so. We'll get everything straight. Right. Because all three well-meaning people do those, but it significantly diminishes this person's ability to deal with whatever they're dealing with, or they're just like, oh, another person trying to fix my issues, or downplay them. So, but when he said that, he didn't say, I mean, he said in so many words what you do say, but I said, I'm going to come up with it pretty succinctly because I want people to remember this. So I said, you need to empathize with them right out of the gate, right? Yep. Oh man, that sounds terrible. That sounds really rough that you've been having to deal with that for such a long time. Yep. You explore with them how they're coping, and whether it's actively coping, how are you creating some kind of change to solve the problem? Or if you can't solve the problem, how are you coping to get your mind off of it, to get some kind of relief? What takes your mind off of it for even 5 minutes? And then if you're a friend of theirs, then you engage with them in something that you would ordinarily do, that you would spend time to, so that you're not just swimming in it constantly what this problem is. Because a lot of well-meaning friends and peers just keep asking them about the problem and talking about the problem. And you're kind of co-ruminating with them, rather than saying, well, now we've explored what you're doing and how that's helping. Let's go watch a movie, or let's pre-COVID days, or let's go do this other thing, so that they can get back into the rest of their life, not just the part that's causing them problems. And so I said, those are the three. And the same thing happens in your family members. Empathize, explore with them how they're coping, or how they want to approach solving the issue, and engage with them. And let's go have a good meal, or let's go, go take a walk, or that kind of stuff.
And that actually trickles down into the departments themselves, because that negativity, kind of, and you and I touched on like the whole post-traumatic stress, that, oh my God, this is the end of my life. That if all you concentrate on is the negative, so you go into the department, the sergeant's a dick, this one's, and everybody jumps on board of the asshole train. Yeah. And it really becomes insidious. And everybody's got to do your 8, 10, 12, 24, 36 hours. Yeah. And it's really trying to get out of that cycle. I mean, and certainly not cheerleading, but being able to look at this more productively. And, same thing with, anything that was emotionally charged on critical incidents or what have you. How do you cope? What's the outcome? And when you surround yourself by people, either on the job, who are extremely negative, and just, well, the sergeant's a dick, he's always been a dick, blah, blah, blah. I forgot where he came from. I mean, just all of that, and kind of a feeding frenzy, as compared to somebody who is able to say, you know what, I would hate to be him. And kind of being able to look at this differently. And with same thing with post-traumatic, is being able to say, really difficult, so glad that you survived. So glad you're here. How are you doing? Kind of what you said about those positive coping skills. What have you done? Because clearly you've done something right. I would love to learn from you. So,
yeah. Yeah. And sometimes they say, well, I've done nothing right. All I've done since this happened is I've drank, or I've just kind of zoned out, or I have, just trying to stay busy to, distracted or whatever. And so that's when a peer supporter, if they are really a resilience ninja and they really get the regular training that they get, they can say, well, and again, they might continue mining. Well, in the past, maybe you've never dealt with this particular thing before, but in the past, how have you dealt with adversity? And so they don't give up mining for how they might have coped with that stuff in the past. But then if the person just says, no, I just literally, I can't, like, brain not functioning, I can't think of anything to do, but then them saying, well, some people have found it to be helpful to take the dog for a walk, or to go out into nature, or to do this other thing. what do you have to lose to try, right? So they still have to be able to, and again, it's not advice giving as much as it is, here's some coping
Right.
options, here's some stuff
Right.
that, they're educating, and then they're letting the person choose what might work for them at any given time.
And the key in listening to you say that is not judging.
Yeah.
They didn't
good does that
say,
do?
well, drinking is not good for you. It's a central nervous system depressant, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
It's being able to kind of acknowledge and not hyper focus, and be able to kind of continue to work. And that's huge. That is absolutely huge, is not being judged.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Nobody's grown from being judged.
Oh, shit.
Right.
I don't want to be judged. I don't know too many people that do.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, you don't want to be judged, but you also balance that with not being complicit, where you don't want to say, well, that sounds fun. That sounds,
Right. Exactly.
Or so you're
Right.
having sex with a bunch of strangers because it helps you forget what's going on. And, so you don't want to be complicit either. And I think that's one of the other things that I sometimes see with more so with peer supporters and friends than obviously I don't see it with clinicians being complicit. Because
You
I'm just not
hope.
in a position. I'm just not in a position to hear that story, I suppose. But is you don't want to be complicit, because sometimes support doesn't look like support. Sometimes support is caring enough to hurt somebody's feelings to say, you haven't been the same lately, right? And this is the training when I do my resilience training. The last of the day is, how do you have a conversation with a peer you're concerned about, because you're all responsible for that, not just peer supporters. And I tell them it's the recipe, depends on who's cooking and who's eating, on how sweet or salty or spicy it's going to be, in your relationship with the person you're talking to. And so, but it should look something like this, hey, I noticed you're not yourself, like the other day, some concrete example, how they were different or whatever. And we got to look out for each other, or, we got to, I've always respected you, and this kind of stuff. And then a very presumptive, what is going on? Because things like, how are you doing, or how's it going, are watered down greetings that nobody even answers anymore. You're halfway down the hall when you've asked that question, and they're not even answering it as anything other than a greeting. And then they're just like, oh, well, I had my gun in my lap today. And you're like, wait, what? And instead, and I've had some peer folks say, well, that's pretty presumptive to say, people have noticed your performance is slipping or changing or whatever. We got to look out for each other. What is going on? Because they're like, well, I don't want them to feel like people are talking about them behind their back. And I say, I don't want us to be complicit and pretend like nobody's noticing that their head's not in the game, because that can actually cost them their life. And so I want to care enough to hurt their feelings and actually say to them, my concern is not your performance. My concern is you. And this is a symptom that something's up with you. And if we focus on getting you right, your performance, whether it's your reports are going to be written better, or you're going to be more patient with your kids, or whatever it is, if we take care of you, those things will work themselves out. Right. But don't be complicit and wait for the person to come to you to say they're having a hard time, because that might not happen.
No, it's spot on. I mean, because the flip side of that is the should'ves, could'ves, and would'ves. Is that now the officer ends up, God forbid, taking their life. And you have all those that saw something and didn't say something. That whole, see something, say something. When it comes to terrorists, that became kind of the catchphrase. And I remember when AIDS was big, with the big triangle, is silence equals death. It just applies to so many different things, all of that. And the key component is saying nothing.
Yeah.
So
I added to that, see, say, and then support, because you can't just see it and you can't just say what you've noticed. You then need to support, and the support has to you have to have we all have to take some responsibility in knowing strategies for what helps people, whether it's what helps them, maybe it's talk to the chaplain, talk to the clinician, talk to the doctor, talk to the CopLine, talk to somebody, right? So you got to know what the resources are to offer some some recommendations on that support, or at least how to get them to connect with how they can support themselves, if they've have some coping mechanism that's helped them.
Had you heard of what the acronym FIND stands for?
There's two versions of it. Which one do you have?
I've got the fucked up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional.
Yes, I have feelings on the inside not expressed, but I know that one too. Right? But
yeah, it was just, when I heard it, I was like, so true. So one of my wives, I was asking about her husband. She's like, he's fine. I said, that's exactly what I'm concerned about. And I told her what fine. She goes, oh, he's really fine. We need to get him in. I'm sure he's fine. Tell him Steph knows you're fine.
Yes. And both versions of the word. Yeah. But a moment ago we were talking about, there's the, what I mentioned, the chaplain said, but the other piece, coming back to the clinicians and the competency of the clinicians, the competency of the peer supporters. A friend of mine, Matt Johnston, up in Vancouver, British Columbia, he's actually a firefighter and a clinician. And he has a course that he does for occupational awareness, to learn how to work with first responders. But he goes beyond the course, and he actually has the clinicians sign an expectation agreement that says, to your point for the guy that you referred to somebody else, that if you cannot fit that person in, it is an expectation to be on this directory that you will work with his peer support team or her peer support team, if you have written consent, of course, and that you will give them a warm handoff to another clinician. You won't just go, too bad, so sad, right? So that's kind of what I hoped to incorporate into what we're doing, like in terms of being on the directory for the approved provider bulletin with FOP, which we're still working on. That's part of it.
I think the thing that pissed me off is that I had spoken to her and told her I was making the referral. So where that disconnect comes from.
Yeah.
But I was very fortunate, and I think that's what has honestly driven me neurotically to find that 25th hour in a day, because I swore that would never happen again. I just, it's hard. We talk about resiliency, and I've, spoken to other people, and I read, part of the chapter where you really spoke about resiliency. I really want you to kind of talk about what resiliency is in your practice and when you refer to it. And behind you is the book title, which is Increasing Resilience in Police and Emergency Personnel. So really an important topic, but I want you to, because I think a lot of times it's just a word that it becomes that catchword. It's like, oh, talk about resilience. We have resiliency training. We have resiliency officers. We have this, we have that. And yet, as you and I have spoken about, this is the most resilient population, period. So what is it about resilience?
Yeah. And it is one of those words that, kind of like the word stress, we're like, what does that mean? What are we, like, everybody knows, but nobody really knows what exactly we're referring to, or we're not all in agreement with it. So I liken resilience to officer safety. And so most people, when they think about it, officer safety, and you could be a firefighter listening to this, or a nurse with patient care and this kind of stuff, is when you go into a situation, you're always assessing, what are the risk factors to me? And what are the protective factors to me? And so it's a constant assessment and reassessment, because we spend a fair amount of our time on autopilot, because we'd never get anything done if we were always sat and thought of the meaning of everything and what we wanted to do all the time, right? We'd never get anything done. And so we spend about 80% of our time on autopilot. So being resilient means pausing, and before you go to that call and being complacent, because that would be autopilot, it's just kind of going, is you'd be assessing, what are the risk factors to me? What are the protective factors to me? What kind of assist do I need? Do I need to be staging a dog or an ambulance or something else, right? Because, and then when you come into the situation, then you're having to reassess, okay, was it what I thought it was going to be? What else do I need to do? So that's for your physical safety, so that, a roof doesn't collapse on you as a firefighter, or something else, ideally doesn't happen to you as a police officer on approach to a house. And, but the thing is that in psychological senses, we don't think about what are the things that are going well for me that are protecting me psychologically, emotionally. What are the things that are a risk factor to me? So we don't think about stuff like, well, how has my sleep been lately? How is my relationship with my significant other? Has my mindset been shifted since I've began this work? What do I need to do about that? What are the things that are actually making me less psychologically sound over time, because I keep being exposed to this negative component of the population? And so it really is a matter of being reflective and self-reflective, to try to make decisions that make you more psychologically sound, make you more psychologically healthy, just like you would be more physiologically safe on a scene. Which means, it doesn't mean you won't get post-traumatic stress or anxiety or depression. It just means you will be able to move through it with greater ease, if you want to use that word at all. More adaptively is probably a better way to say it, because you can't build and strengthen a relationship at a time when you really need it. That's like trying, my friend who's a trooper in Oklahoma, he said that's like trying to fly the plane while you're building it. You can't really do that at that time. And so that's how I see resilience, is it's something that you have to be aware of and build and rebuild, to not be complacent.
The one word you use, which really ruminates with me, is through it.
Mm-hmm.
Is I think that is so important. Like
Mm-hmm.
that one word, because so often first responders feel like, if I'm depressed, if I have a panic attack, if I have post-traumatic stress disorder, I'm stuck. There's nowhere. This has now defined me.
Yeah.
Whereas if you look at it, is exactly that, is that you go through it.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other end, to me, that's the other part of that resiliency,
Mm-hmm.
is you've gone through it.
Yeah.
You understand it. You hopefully have grown from it, because I think we are a sum total of all of our experiences, and we don't get to pick and choose, for the good ones or the bad ones, but really gives you so much depth to be able to truly be there for someone else. When we screen volunteers and you look at questionnaires of potential CopLine listeners, and they have no experience in anything that could be emotionally charged, I think, oh shit, what are they going to pull from? And the other part of that is that if they're not comfortable listing it, also a flag for us, because then they're guarded. So it's been interesting, but I love the ones that have tons of crap. And when I call them up, they say, oh, I don't know how you guys are going to look at this, but I just wanted to make sure, I have a lot of experience. I'm like, love it. Love it. You're not going to be vomiting all over the phone, but if that's what got you here and you want to give back. And we also ask questions about if you've ever sought counseling, because that also tells us, when we get the old timer that says, no, I got through it myself and everybody can suck it up like I did. Right. So it's been really interesting, and a really incredible process. But I think I'm seeing, and you tell me what's going on there in Oregon, but I think you've got your pulse on the country. It really does seem like more and more people certainly being able to talk about wellness programs, being able to talk about mental health, being able to talk about stressors in law enforcement. But I am seeing some barriers to treatment finally dissipating. I'm not going to tell you that they're not there. I still also find that EAP programs are not trusted.
Right.
So that they do typically go outside. And yet probably the most successful and amazing one, I don't know if you know Dr. Beverly Anderson out of Metropolitan Police Department, but her EAP program is only with licensed clinicians with PhDs. So it's not peer-driven EAP, and it's and it is done with police psychologists. I mean, she's incredible. But she got it. She got it.
Mhm.
And interestingly enough, her program is paid for by the union. It's a union contract.
Mhm.
So not really departmental.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I just find that's one of the heaviest lifts is to try and send them inside their own departments. Are you finding that as well?
Yeah, and the EAP is sometimes a 4-letter word, but it's complicated, and I think it varies by state because I'm a private practitioner. I work for myself, but I contract with multiple agencies, and I actually take EAP benefits, which means that the person can go through their EAP and see me.
Mhm.
But here's the trick, because the EAP usually lowballs clinicians. They usually have the starter clinicians or people that are willing to work for pennies. And so as a bargaining tool, some of the agencies I work with said, no, we want a first responder list where we only want the first responders that Stephanie and Drew, who works with me, have vetted. And so as a bargaining chip with the union, with others that with the EAP, they created a contract where if the first responder calls the EAP and says, I want to work with Stephanie Conn, or I want to work with Drew Prochniak, or I want to work with this person, then, or I want the first responder list because I'm a first responder, they get a first responder clinician.
Nice.
And they don't go through whoever just happens to be there, whatever. And so that has been a bargaining tool that the agencies have used to kind of strong arm some of these EAPs that want to, to send them to somebody that will take a whole lot less, but has very little experience, if any experience, working with first responders or trauma at all, for that matter, which is altogether another issue. Yeah.
I wanted to talk about sleep.
Mm-hmm.
When I lecture, I'll typically ask how many people are waking up at the 90-minute marks, the 3-hour marks, 4.5, and I do exclude in the room. I am a little bit discriminatory. I do talk about men over 45 that the obligatory male piss in the middle of the night does not count for when they wake up. So I do the exclusion, and pregnant women. Those are the two that have to be excluded.
Yeah.
But sleep is so instrumental. It's one of the first things that goes.
Mm-hmm.
Those the nightmares, the dreams that they can't control, whereas during the day they do a pretty good job trying to control most of their demons. Mm-hmm. And what we find with sleep issues is they go throughout the diagnoses that we see the most, which is going to be your depression, your PTSD. I mean, and once sleep is off the hook, everything else goes. So I wanted you, because I know that you and I had touched on that, but I really want you to kind of get into that and the brain and all the good stuff that goes along with it.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. And I continue to receive more training on this. And I was actually just talking with the creator of imagery rehearsal therapy the other day, Dr. Barry Krakow. I was talking with him last Friday because he does a lot of training and he does a lot of research, randomized controlled trials on sleep. It's just amazing, some of the stuff that's out there. And so, I tell first responders that if I only had one session with them and they said, all right, Stephanie, this is all you get. You get one. What do you got? I would get their sleep in order, because your emotional health, your decision-making, your relationship, everything else, like your ability to process trauma, everything else is built on that foundation of sleep. If you think about it, sleep deprivation is a form of torture that gets people to tell national secrets, right? It causes people to kind of split, to fracture mentally, emotionally. And so everything rests on the idea of you getting good sleep. And there's a really good Joe Rogan podcast where he interviews Matthew Walker. And Matt Walker gives kind of a 90-minute synopsis of what his book about why we sleep. But basically, he describes it that when it's a myth to think that when we go to sleep that our brains shut off and we're just, resting and recovering. He said our brain is very active when we sleep. When we're awake, it's kind of low-grade brain damage as our brain is working and functioning and dealing with stressors and stuff from throughout our waking hours. And then when we go to sleep at night, our brain goes into this, okay, we got to recover, we got to repair, we got to rejuvenate this body and this mind. And so it actually goes in as we're awake, we're putting these little deposits on our brain, just kind of this little byproduct, kind of almost like the gunk that builds up on an engine as it's running. And as we go to sleep, our brain starts secreting cerebrospinal fluid, and it starts cleaning these deposits off our brain. So then when we wake up the next day, it's like, boom, we start our engine, we have a clean brain, which makes, the cops laugh thinking about waking up with a clean brain. But if we don't get that full 8 hours of sleep that our brain requires for that kind of repair and cleansing, it's almost like pulling the dishwasher door open midway through the clean cycle and pulling the dishes out and using them. That's what we're doing to our brain. We haven't gotten the debris off from the day before. We're putting more on. And then every day we open that dishwasher midway through the cycle. And so effectively, all these little deposits that are being deposited on the brain day after day after day become brain plaques, and that becomes early onset dementia. And so there is no power wash for us to get that off of our brain. And so it's absolutely vital that we not interrupt that sleep cycle of 8 hours, because there's some people that say, oh, well, I've always gotten by on 5, or I've always been able to get by on 6. And he calls bullshit on that. He said, you might get by on it, but you're actually having this brain damage that is going to creep up on you over time, because you're not getting that stuff cleaned off. And between hours 6 and 8, we also know is the time when our brain is most active at dealing with trauma and drama of the day, because you have the most REM sleep during hours 6 and 8. And the REM sleep is where we're doing a lot of that emotional processing and memory storage and that kind of stuff in a good way. We want it dealt with and pushed back. And if you don't get that, because a lot of people get 6 or less hours of sleep, you're knocking out the largest part of that function. And so you are more apt to have post-traumatic stress disorder, because your brain isn't processing the drama and the trauma of the day, which it needs during that REM sleep, that rapid eye movement sleep.
So what happens, and this has come up quite a bit, with sleep meds? So now we've got officers who are not, you're going to need a blowgun to get them down.
Yeah.
And there's over-the-counter meds.
Yeah.
And there's the prescription meds.
Yeah.
And I know in my practice, I have opinions on pretty much everything anyway, but I certainly have opinions on different prescribed medications. So I'm going to throw that out your way.
Well, we know that benzodiazepines actually prevent the brain from processing and having processing trauma, right? So it inhibits the brain's ability to create new neural pathways, which means it's harder to process trauma. So there's one thing. And then a lot of the sleep medications, the prescription kind, are sedatives. So nobody wakes up from surgery and says, oh, I feel so relieved. I was so restorative, to have been sedated for the last couple of hours while I had surgery, right? It's so sedating ourselves during sleep isn't necessarily going to get you restorative sleep.
So Stephanie, I just want to get it out there because not everybody knows. So benzodiazepines are your Xanax, your Ativan, your Klonopin,
all the PANs and PAMs and
right. So I want to get that out, and then your sedatives. Go ahead. I just want to be able to kind of spell it out for people that.
Yeah. And I'm not a physician, so you don't want to just stop taking medication. You need to talk to a physician about other options. But these things are not the, sadly, if you go to a general physician and you say, hey, I'm not sleeping, they'll go, take this, take this, take this, take this, take this, right? And they won't necessarily investigate why it is that you're not sleeping well. And you might have some kind of sleep disorder. In fact, easily 40% of first responders have a sleep disorder. And so if you have a sleep disorder, you're basically it's taking the sleep medication is just kind of masking what the disorder is, rather than actually it's dealing with the symptom rather than the source. So you'd be wise to go to a physician, say, I want to go to a board certified sleep specialist, or find one on sleepfoundation.org, which is, the website for finding about shift work disorder and sleep disorders and things like that. And find a sleep specialist, because they can do neurofeedback, so they can train your nervous system to calm down so you can sleep. They can do sleep training, positional training. They can investigate to see if there's any kinds of breathing issues that might be impacting you. When I talked to Dr. Krakow the other day, it was interesting. He said 75% of their people actually got better by just simply wearing that nose strip. Yeah. And he said 75% of the people improved from
Crazy.
wearing that stupid thing because it helped them to breathe better. So if you had a breathing issue, that helped. But then even if you had an anxiety issue, it still helps you breathe better. And we tend to feel better if we're anxious, if we can at least breathe better.
Right.
And so he goes, and then there's all these other things where you actually can have like cleaning the nasal cavities in case there's any kind of debris or stuff that actually causes your sleep. So you don't have to necessarily have an apnea issue or snore or have someone tell you that you're waking them up or you're, stopping breathing or whatever. You can have all kinds of other issues that a sleep study could investigate and demonstrate. And it can actually be, the source can be fixed rather than medication, which is symptom control, which is very different. And then, people say, well, what about melatonin? And sleep specialists I've spoken with said, synthetic melatonin hasn't been around long enough for us to know that there's not any negative side effects, like the body not producing its own kind of thing. And so it's, use that if you need to flip schedules, or you're on a different time zone, but it shouldn't be something you take on a regular basis. Again, you're doing symptom control rather than looking at the source of the issue. So that's just my piece on the medication, but I can, unless you had some other questions, I could say some of the recommendations for falling asleep or staying asleep kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, and I know that some of it has been really figuring out clean sleep with electronics and that kind of stuff. So go ahead. I'm going to let you continue the journey.
Yeah, well, some of it has to do, sleep hygiene is, and again, you can see all that from sleepfoundation.org about not having the lights in your face from phones and computers and things like that, going to sleep at the same time, getting up same time, even if it, even on your days off and stuff like that. But sometimes we don't shut our brain off. And I have a lot of people say, well, Stephanie, how do I turn my brain off so I can sleep? And I say, you don't want to shut off your brain. That's death. You want to actually just focus your brain on something instead of trying to shut it off. So a sleep specialist, Dr. Luc Bedouin from Montreal, has this thing called cognitive shuffling. So he says, think of a 4-letter word. I'm sure you all can, but let's just use the word shoe. And every time your mind drifts off to something, bring it back and say, okay, how many words can I spell with the letter S? Sock, see an image of a sock. Stew, see an image of a pot of stew. And if you keep thinking, oh, what is that going to happen? Is the sergeant going to do this? Or why did they say that? Or, nope, I'm on the letter S. So it basically trains your monkey mind that's jumping around from limb to limb, thought to thought, worry to worry, random or otherwise, to come back to this kind of trunk by spelling these words. But he said, why you do this, say the word and then see the image, is it actually simulates what your brain does when it's going into a sleep state anyway. So you're basically priming your brain to go to sleep with this adult version of counting sheep.
They found that marathon runners actually had sleep problems because when they were running, they actually put themselves into the same sleep rhythm, which was really kind of fascinating to
Weird.
To see that. But while you're talking, that's what ruminated with me when you were talking about that, because when you run, you kind of just keep doing the same thing, concentrating, same things going over and over. You're pretty hyper focused. So it makes complete sense, and going to bed the same thing. Thoughts on the Benadryls and that stuff, which are quite popular?
I think, if you're prone to allergies, taking Benadryl makes sense, because it's going to help you with the breathing, although it could dehydrate you and those kinds of things. So then you're trying to drink the water, and then that makes you get up for a whole different reason. Again, I still see it as similar to melatonin, because it's still symptom control. Yeah. Not source. And with so many sleep disorders lending themselves to, having to do with respiration or having to do with an overactive nervous system, where you can actually do something that causes because that's the other thing. I have a lot of people that say, well, I'll fall asleep just like that. And I'll fall asleep really quickly, which I thought was a good thing until I talked to a sleep specialist and said, you should not fall asleep immediately. If you fall asleep immediately, you're overtired. That is actually a problem. People think it's I'm a good sleeper, I can fall asleep. 3 hours later, I'm awake, and then awake, and awake, and awake. And that is oftentimes a sympathetic nervous system, which is that fight-flight system, that is overactivated, because in first responder work, you're going to be overactivated all the time because you're always trying to stay vigilant, if not hyper vigilant, to pay attention to stuff. And that gets your system worked up where it's, and then you try to go to sleep in a worked up system. So you actually have to do something to ratchet that system down so that it can not just fall asleep, but stay asleep.
Meditation.
Yeah.
How
And that is
difficult do you find it with first responders? Holy crap.
well,
I'm thinking like lobotomy half the time when you're trying it. It's like,
yeah. And the thing is I think it's a matter of graded exposure to things, because if you said just sit and focus on the breath, they're like, oh my God, are you fucking kidding me?
exactly.
Right? I just like, really? So make it like an intro to it is, okay, let's do an object meditation. Let's look at something and I'm just going to stare at this, like for example, okay, here's a pen holder. I'm just going to stare at this pen holder. I'm going to meditate on this object, and I'm just going to notice the color of it. And it's kind of this mint green with colored with little striations of green and little dots of blue and yellow. I wonder what is happening. Nope, I'm back on. And is that, is it green with mint around it, or is it mint with green on it? Right. So you actually get your brain so it's a bit more active of a meditation, because you are actually focusing on something versus something that's harder, this more elusive, which is focusing on the breath. Right.
So I think the word meditation is what throws them. I think they kind of look at that and they're in Haight-Ashbury. Right. Exactly. And the next thing you know, you're going to have them levitate. So being able to kind of shift it up and say, I just want you to think about your pen.
Focus. Just focus. You're training your brain to focus.
And that I think they get.
Yeah.
I want you to, shift your focus. Got you on dead body. Let's what would it be like right now to focus on your pillow?
Yeah.
Whatever it is. But I think sometimes they get so stuck semantically.
Yeah.
And it's funny as hell.
Yeah. Well, I tell people words matter. They matter far more than you'd ever know. Because if I ask somebody how they feel about it, what are your feelings on that? Well, feelings are the F word, right? I ask them, what was your reaction to that? They'll talk about reaction, and we're talking about the same thing. But which was actually some wisdom shared with me by a staff sergeant I used to work with. But yeah, using focus, we're going to do a focus exercise.
Yep.
Instead of a meditation exercise.
Absolutely.
But I think most of the first responders that I work with, either the ones I work with as clients or the ones I train, if they understand the why, and that's why I'm all about
totally
science, signs or symptoms, and strategies. If they get the science, you get the buy-in for the strategies.
Absolutely. 100% see that and agree with it. And the other thing about words is when they select a word and they put it in a report, that word will be looked at what could potentially be 5 years and will be held against them. So in picking a specific word for us is very different. So and they do get stuck on a word. And I know it's been really important when I can tell that there's a word that clearly they have an issue with, is that I say, you know what, let me reselect a word. And I think that people don't realize that you get to make mistakes, because being able to own those in a session helps the person that you're with realize you're not perfect.
Right.
And you can, and again, not an egregious mistake, like why'd you have your gun out mistake. But, I but I find sometimes truthfully that I'm harsher and then realize that I need to select a different word. And I'll say, I think that came across far harsher than I meant it to. And then being able to reselect. And I found that gives them permission to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think there's some wisdom in that. And I think I have done that when I do the training that I do, which is interesting because sometimes my clients will register for my training and this kind of stuff, which is interesting. And then they'll see me talk in my training about some of the mistakes that I have made, mistakes I made when I was a gang detective, mistakes I made, when I worked in patrol, all kinds of stuff. Right. And they're like, oh, I didn't know that about you. Because I don't spend my session talking about me. And
Right,
so
exactly.
right, but it actually makes them trust me more because
Exactly.
I will talk about how I fucked something up or how despite, all my, thoughts about X, Y, and Z, I still did that. And I think it's powerful because none of us,
Right.
there isn't you're the broken child, I'm the fixer of broken children. There's not that crap because nobody needs that. First responders are smart people. They're intelligent. They're fixers, they're problem solvers, that kind of stuff. And so they need somebody that helps them to capitalize on that and to understand that, you got some letters behind your name, but so what? That just means you specialized in something else. And, so you're able to give them some information that, things will reverse, they'd be given to you.
When you're on the job, what was your worst day on the job?
Well, I had 2 coworkers killed in the line of duty a year apart. So those days sucked pretty bad. From an emotional standpoint, and in fact, the second one was the catalyst for me changing professions. I say changing because it wasn't exactly a choice. I didn't choose to leave policing. I just chose to become a psychologist. I intended to do both. But the day my coworker Dwayne was killed and I was on the peer support team and got called in the middle of the night to come out and receive his family, I was like, oh my God, or receive his family. What do you even say to someone whose family member's just been killed? And fortunately for me and for them, they decided to go with their community, their church community that night. But then they reassigned me to go down to the academy where my coworkers were at. And we'd had a changing of the guard from a police psychologist to a city psychologist. And the city psychologist didn't know anything about policing. I later learned she didn't actually even care for us. She did half a ride along and then didn't want to. And she said, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't know how you do this. Let me out of the car. But she was standing up doing a crisis mobilization briefing the morning of Dwayne's death. And everybody's in the room, all the officers, my coworkers in the room are kind of rumbling around, like, who's this woman in her house talking about our fallen brother? And she had the wherewithal to realize, hey, people are not responding very well to me being here. They've never met me before. And, so she said, Stephanie, can you come up, kind of take it from here? I said, yeah. So I stood up there and with the biggest lump in my throat ever, had to share the details of how he died and then try to move on from there to say, okay, and here's what the resources are, and here's what the plan is, and here's when the next update for information will be. And that was brutal. That was just gut-wrenching. And when I had people after that ask me to help them with stuff, I was happy to help them with stuff, but they wanted me to go beyond the peer support role that I had, and I wasn't equipped to do that. And so that's why I got into counseling in the first place, because I thought, well, I was like, there aren't clinicians that specialize in this, not back then, not that I could find. And so I decided to become that. And then I intended to go back to policing, but my practice took off and I've never been able to return to policing. But that was probably about the most gut-wrenching day, because I've had instances where people started shooting each other in my presence and seeing some pretty graphic stuff like most cops do. And those were hard, certainly, but that wasn't personal. That wasn't one of my own.
And your best day on the job?
Best day on the job. Oh boy. Wow. Nobody ever asked me that. So there's just so many. And I think they were, and probably just the negativity bias that we as first responders have. We're like, well, the negative stuff, you want 5 more stories about that? Because I could give you those.
No.
The best day on the job were I think, when I was working in patrol and I was working with my partner, Jeff, for a while, and we would just have fun. And there was it's probably a silly story for saying it was the best day on the job, because it wasn't like I caught somebody, and high five and this kind of stuff. But we had gone to a domestic violence call, and this gal, we had her husband hooked up and he was in the car, and the other officer was watching him to make sure he didn't go berserk. And Jeff and I are standing there in the kitchen talking to this woman, and you don't stand in the kitchen in a domestic violence call, but she was this little old lady, and the perpetrator was secured in the car. And she hauls off and hits me in the back. And I looked at my partner, Jeff, and I was like, what the fuck just happened? She just, like, I didn't really feel it. She was a little bitty lady and I had my vest on, so I couldn't, but I felt it, but it didn't hurt. And I just looked at him, and she looked at me and said in her broken English, "You have a bug on your back." And we were just laughing so hard. I was like, this woman doesn't know not to hit an officer. She just, boom. And then I was part mad at her for doing that, part mad at him for not, like giving me a heads up that the woman was going to hit me. And so we just laughed for months and months and months after that. I'd just be on a call, and before we'd make contact with someone while we're waiting for the person to come to the door or whatever, Jeff would just say, "You have a bug on your back," and would just haul off and just slap the shit out of me. And I'm just like, and that was just kind of the fun that we had, working in patrol. So it's not a big story again, where we, certainly I've caught people, and I've had good cases where we've gotten good things in the gang unit.
It's the camaraderie story. It's the story that makes the job a good job. It's a beautiful story. It's exactly the question I asked you with the answer.
Yeah. I mean, that's what stands out. And Jeff and I are still friends. It's been a number of years, and I saw him about a little over a year ago. I saw him. I went to he was working in Air One with the helicopter at Fort Worth, and I went to see him, and we're just kind of smiling and laughing because we're just like, "You have a bug on your back."
That's awesome.
We just haul off and slap the hell out of each other now. And that was, I mean, that was the thing. And to this day, I'm still good friends with my recruit, and was actually just texting with him the other day. And so I think you're right. It's the camaraderie of the people that are there with you during the fun times and during the stressful times that you just have those enduring relationships.
So if I had a crystal ball and I look at Dr. Stephanie Conn 10 years from now, what more has she accomplished, and what does she hope the world looks like in a psychological realm for first responders?
That's an easy one. Actually, I thought you scared me at first, because I was like, oh boy, okay, that's easy though, because I have my eye on that. One is first responders will know where to find help. They won't have to ask the supervisor, ask somebody to ask somebody to ask somebody. Boom, there will be a website. They will know, here's where you find it. And the clinicians that will be on that list will be outstanding. That's one. Two, peer supporters across the nation will be properly vetted and properly trained. Like they will get the training that they need on a regular basis, to include EMDR for paraprofessionals. Now, I'm trained in EMDR, and I'm trained in how to do EMDR in a group setting, but I want the peer supporters to be trained as EMDR as paraprofessionals, which is a cutting edge treatment where they can actually take their peers and say, okay, everybody, you don't have to share the details of your trauma. Here's some stuff I want you to do. Here's some things that are going to kind of help your brain clear that trauma and get it moving on through. So peer supporters will be trained in that. We'll be spending a lot more time upstream doing clinicians doing annual check-ins, spending time out in the station, spending time out in the cars, spending time out in other places like that, rather than waiting for people to crash at the bottom and come to us, and those kinds of things. Now, the list will be there in case they need to, but I want to redefine where we're doing our job and and who's doing the job and how we're doing the job. So I have some pretty big goals, and I want a lot more information out there in terms of want people to understand the benefit of neurofeedback and EMDR. And I want more collaboration with sleep people. I want more people in the sleep industry to pair up with us, and for us to really start having centers where people can go and they can learn yoga for first responders. They can get neurofeedback. They can get EMDR. They can get family therapy. They can do groups. They can do where it's not really this fragmented ad hoc attempt to try to help them. That's what I hope to create with my work with the FOP, with IECP, with my own practice. With here in Oregon, we have the Public Safety Assistance Network that I'm the clinical director for. Like I want this to be the thing from across the nation.
Beautiful. Is there anything that I didn't cover or ask that you wanted me to or wanted to address?
No, I would say you can pick that sucker up on my website if you want, or you can pick it up on Amazon, either one. I'm a little cheaper than Amazon, but they're a little faster than me. So it depends on if you want cheap or fast. If you want it signed by me, you have to get it from me because Amazon doesn't have any that are signed by me. And
again, for those that can't see, we've got it. You don't even have to bend. It is Increasing Resilience in Police and Emergency Personnel. Wonderful, informative book. You get to meet Stephanie, and you can tell just incredible what she does. Just a huge, huge asset. And going through the career you did and the experiences that you had have made you even more of an asset and valuable to the community and to all of us.
It just makes me feel, and I get chills just then. It still makes me feel like, even though I'm not in a position to get back in the car and start, return to shagging calls with people, that kind of stuff. If I'm helping them be their best selves, then that will in turn help them do that. And until I can get back out there, that's what I'll do.
You're there every day. You're just there differently every day. But your voice and what you've done has given so many more than just those that you could have touched in your own department. Truly, if you look at how many you've now been able to touch by choosing to go on for your doctorate, by choosing to write the book, by choosing to continue to make sure that there is truly cultural competence, and that those that are seeking treatment and finally have the courage to do so with appropriate clinicians, where they don't have the first bad experience and that's the last experience.
Yeah.
So I truly thank you. I thank you for your time. I thank you for everything that you've done for law enforcement. And I thank you for being on the show. I truly, truly have appreciated and loved being on. So
thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
The respect is mutual.
Thank you. So I will see everybody next week on StephTherapy911 with Stephanie Simers, again on Facebook Live on Sunday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.